Guys, I feel like we're on a huge trace rifle kick right now. One of our builds that we just recently dropped is our Wave Splitter build, where we essentially stacked a ton of damage buffs together, which was extremely potent, especially considering the changes that came to Wave Splitter in update 4.1.0. And considering that it was void, we would stack it with things like volatile rounds to pull off those non-stop volatile explosions on bigger targets and consistent high damage numbers on red bars and majors. However, today, we're going to be talking about the trace rifle you guys kept mentioning in the comment section of that video over and over. That is actually Ager's Scepter. You guys have pointed out that Ager's is busted right now and that it's dealing crazy damage when you stack on a bunch of buffs with Ager's Catalyst. And this led us to go ahead and make a build for you because, fellas, you were right. This thing is good. Not only is it dealing out heavy damage, but we also found a way to get max stats. We're talking hundreds in mobility, resilience, recovery, discipline, intellect, and strength pretty much 100% of the time with Ager's Scepter in this build. And if you want to be the Ice Wizard of the battlefield, constantly rocking max stats and freezing everything in sight, then use this build, which we have collectively named Ice Age. By the way, big shout out to the movies. Now we got two versions of this build, and they're very similar, but one of them is tailored more for high level content like GMs, while the other is for general play in any PvE activity. The only thing that separates the two are a few mods, which we'll touch on last. So what do you need for this build? First, you're gonna be on a Stasis subclass. I know, it's not solar, it's not void. This is the first Stasis build we've done since our Osmiomancy build just a few months ago. Now for your abilities, you want an Empowering Rift. For your aspect, you have Glacial Harvest, which states that freezing targets create stasis shards around the frozen targets, and higher tier combatants create more shards. For the second aspect, it's really your choice. If you like having a Stacy, then go with Bleak Watcher. And this will probably be your best bet if you're running the GM version of this build, because those turrets can really help out with ad control. Ice Threat Bolts is also good too, as you'll be freezing and shattering enemies non-stop with Ager's Scepter, which will trigger those Stasis Seekers that find and freeze other targets if your Ager's Blast doesn't freeze them first. Now for our fragments, we have Whisper of Fissures, which increases the damage and size of the burst of stasis when you destroy a crystal or defeat a frozen target, which once again will be happening all the time since you'll be maining Ager's Scepter. Whisper of Conduction will make the stasis shards you generate track to you, which is very helpful in high level content and just in general. Whisper of Bonds, which will grant you super energy when you defeat frozen targets, and we're going to be pairing this with, of course, Mantle of Battle Harmony, and of course that bonus super energy you'll be getting from its exotic perk, which we'll be getting to here in just a second. Now for our last fragments, we've got Whisper of Hedrons, and this is what gave us the idea that maybe having constant uptime of max stats, tier 10s across the board is actually possible here. A while back, Whisper of Hedrons was actually changed now grants increased weapon stability, weapon aim assist, mobility, resilience, and recovery for 10 seconds after freezing a target with stasis. Now, of course, this is extremely nasty considering Ager's will be freezing targets constantly with its intrinsic perk Ager's Call, which states that final blows of this weapon generate a slowing burst around the defeated target. Now this slowing burst will freeze those nearby targets, so you'll always have that buff from Whisper of Hedrons as long as you have enemies to shoot. Now this buff gives you plus 60 to mobility, resilience, and recovery, meaning as long as you have 40 of each of those stats from your armor, which is beyond easy, then you will achieve triple 100s without having to do anything but freeze an enemy. And again, it doesn't go beyond the cap. Now Whisper of Hedrons is taking care of those stats. How do we get intellect, discipline, and strength to 100s? Trust me, we're gonna get there. For your weapons and armor, obviously you're gonna be rocking Ager's Scepter and Mantle of Battle Harmony, as mentioned already. Ager's provides that slowing and freezing burst on defeated targets, but it also refills ammo from your mag on stasis final blows thanks to its Regus Refrain perk. And if you have the Catalyst, you'll have access to Will Given Form. Will Given Form is an alternate weapon action that you can activate when you have full super. And once activated, Will Given Form will drain your super energy, overflow the magazine, and empower the beam with an 80% damage buff and the ability to slow and freeze targets until your magazine or super runs out or the weapon is stowed. Now that 80% damage buff is no joke here, guys. And you can blow your extra damage load for a long time before your super is fully drained. You can even stop this extra damage phase whenever you want to save super energy. And just getting kills with Agers, in this mode or not, will give you small amounts of super energy back thanks to Whisper of Bonds and Mantle Battle Harmony. Now speaking of Mantle Battle Harmony, its exotic perk states that takedowns with weapons that have a damage type matching your subclass element will grant you super energy. Now while your super energy is full, you instead gain a temporary bonus to weapon damage of the type matching your subclass element. In our case, Stasis with Ager's Scepter. This combined with Whisper of Bonds makes your super generate very, very fast when you're getting stasis kills and freezing targets. The more your super is full, the more you can make use of Will Given Form and Ager's 80% damage boost. But what if we can get more damage on top of the 80%? Just how much can we get to stack onto Ager's? This of course brings us to our mods. As far as elemental affinity goes, you'll need at least one void affinity, one stasis affinity, and it doesn't matter which armor slots has those affinities. Very easy, nothing really too demanding here. These are the mods you're going to be using for the non-GM version of this build. For that helmet, we've got Harmonic Siphon, so we can generate orbs on Ager kills. The Seasonal Trace Rifle Ammo Finder mod, so we can increase our chances of ammo drops. Font of Wisdom, which grants a significant boost to our intellect for 30 seconds after picking up an elemental well. Now, this significant boost is literally 100 intellect. It maxes it out. And just like we stated earlier, it does not go beyond the cap. You get max intellect for 30 seconds just from one well. That matches your subclass element type. Now, this is how we get our max intellect for all of our 100 stats. In the gloves, we've got Overload Trace Rifle for those champs. Might as well have it at all times, but if you're not facing any champs, then feel free to swap it out. We also have Font of Might, which grants us 25% weapon damage boost for 10 seconds when we pick up a well matching our elemental type. Now, slotted in Mantle of Battle Harmony, we have Trace Rifle Reserves, as well as Armor of the Dying Star for void and solar damage resist, and elemental shards. This makes it so that those stasis shards that we're constantly generating when we freeze targets will count as stasis elemental wells. So now picking up a stasis shard will proc Font of Might and Font of Wisdom. So freezing a target will generate a stasis shard and proc Whisper of Hedrons, which gives us our tier 10 mobility, as well as resilience and recovery. And picking up a stasis shard will grant you Font of Wisdom, giving us 10 tier intellect. So the only stats left are discipline and strength. So if you focus all of your armor stats on just those two and are able to get those both to 100 and maybe even counter that with like 100 resilience, just so you're always at that cap, then all you have to do is freeze a target and pick up stasis shards, and fellas, you got max stats. Tier 10s across the board. And sure, Whisper of Hedrons only lasts 10 seconds, but it refreshes every single time you freeze an enemy. So you'll have no issue whatsoever keeping this buff around at all times with Ager Scepter. Now moving on to our boots. You're definitely going to want to rock Trace Rifle Scavenger. And in our class item, we have Radiant Orbs, which will allow us to become Radiant, which is a 25% weapon damage boost on orb pickup. And we're generating those orbs constantly with Harmonic Siphon and Ager Scepter. So what do we get when we actually stack these damage values together? Here are the numbers. Base Ager Scepter, 1,116 per body, 2,258 per crit. Ager's with Radiant kicks it up to 2,014 per body, 2,823 per crit. Radiant plus Font of Might is 2,517 per body, 3,528 per crit. And then Ager Scepter with Radiant, Font of Might, Absorption Cells, which is Battle Harmony's 20% damage boost that you get when you have full super, kicks it up to 3,020 per body, 4,234 per crit. Now, unfortunately, we can't stack Absorption Cells from Battle Harmony with Will Given Form from Ager's because Absorption Cells requires you to have full super to get the damage boost. But once you activate Will Given's Form on Ager's, you will lose Absorption Cells, but you'll be able to benefit from Absorption Cells when you're not using Ager's ability. And the max damage you can do with Ager's not in Will Given Form without adding any debuffs is 3,020 to the body and 4,234 per crit. And no, you cannot pair this with Empowering Rift to get your damage even higher because both Empowering Rift and Absorption Cells are considered empowering buffs, and you can't stack one empowering buff with another. The only exception to this rule is of course Radiance, which can stack some empowering buffs, including the ones we're using for this build. But what if we activate Will Given Form on Ager's? What's our damage look like then if we have all of our damage buffs active at the same time? Ager's with Radiant plus Font of Might plus Will Given Form cranks our damage up to 4,530 per body, 6,351 per crit. Now guys, you can increase this damage even more if you're hitting an enemy that's frozen because you deal 5% increased damage to frozen targets, thus putting the damage at 4,756 per body, 6,668 per crit. Now guess what? We're not done yet because you can add Empowering Rift onto all of this, giving you a max damage output of 5,423 per body, 7,602 per crit. And of course, this is elevated against frozen targets at 5,708 per body, 8,002 damage per crit. And a full mag of Ager's, while in Will Given Form, gives you 194 shots in the mag and takes about 8.5 seconds to completely blow your load. In a perfect world, with all of these buffs active and hitting a frozen target, that equates to around 1.1 million damage just to the body. And if we're living in an even more perfect world and you're somehow landing all crits, you're looking at around 1.5 million damage in 8.5 seconds. Now, obviously, this is not going to happen often. You'd have to time everything so perfectly for all of these things to line up, especially when Font of Might and Radiant only last 10 seconds. But you can already see just how much damage this build is capable of dishing out. Now, if you haven't already gathered just how this build works, it's simple. To get to Ager's max damage, all you got to do is pick up an orb for Radiant, freeze a target for a Stasis Shard for Font of Might, and if you don't want to use Will Given Form and you instead want to take advantage of Absorption Cells, all you need is his full super and a kill to get that to proc, and there you go. That's it. If you don't want to use Will Given Form, you do the same thing. Get an orb, get a shard, but now you pop an Empowering Rift and activate Will Given Form, granting you maximum damage. There's other crazy things you can rock with this as well. Jared actually rocks double trace rifles, and essentially you can use all the mods that we just brought up, but also equip Taking Charge, so you become charged with light on orb pickup. Then equip the Void Charge with Light mod Extra Reserves, which grants you a chance to get special ammo to drop on Void weapon kills when charged with light. Equip the new Void Legendary Trace Rifle Hollow Denial to get those Void kills when you need Ager's ammo. Extra Reserves plus Trace Rifle Ammo Finder plus Trace Rifle Scavenger plus Trace Rifle Reserves should keep you from running out of ammo. It's just non-stop lasers. Even better, if you have a Hollow Denial with Adaptive Munitions and Killing Tally, this will absolutely destroy shields that aren't Stasis or Void, and you'll be able to take them down a bit faster with Adaptive Munitions. And of course, Killing Tally consistently keeps increasing your damage with Hollow Denial when you're using it to generate special ammo for Agers. Granted, this is going to be, of course, tougher to do in things like Master or Grandmasters, but you can use this in things like solo Legend Story missions without ever running out of special ammo, and of course, it's a blast to use. And remember, if you can get those stats lined up just right on your armor, you'll also be looking at 100 in every stat. We'll have this double trace rifle build as well as the GM friendly build, both linked in the description via dim links. Now, the GM build is pretty similar, but you're probably not going to want to be rocking double trace rifles. So you can remove the charge with light mods and instead slot in Revitalizing Blasts alongside Radiant Orbs in your class item. Now, Revitalizing Blasts will cause an ignition when you stun champs. And when it comes to stunning overload champs with Ager Scepter, you get a weird interaction. We've always had this issue where freezing an overload champion would take the champion out of the stun. That still happens. But now that trace rifles can stun overloads and we have a stasis trace rifle with Agers, we can take advantage of that weird interaction and use it to deal more damage. Equip the Bleak Watcher aspect so you can throw down a stasis turret, and that stasis turret will constantly freeze the overload champion, and as it's doing that, keep firing Agers at it and it will proc a stun over and over again, which will in turn proc the ignite from Revitalizing Blasts over and over and over again. Big thanks to Court. He's the man that made all the spreadsheets for what buffs and debuffs stack and don't stack, which have been a big help to all of our recent build videos. Highly recommend checking out his spreadsheets. We'll have a link to that in the description as well. So guys, that is your Ager Scepter build. Again, big shout out to everyone who recommended we give it a go. I know everyone's crazy about the 3.0 subclasses. I like them too. But Stasis, especially with the right builds, combined with Ager Scepter, is straight nasty. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.